To understand Crazy Horse, we need to understand not only his life, but the life of the Indians at that time. And the Indians in this case means the American Indians, but more precisely the Sioux Indian, of which he was a member of the Lakota tribe. And we need to see where Crazy Horse fitted into all of that. But in the context of that, we need to understand what we call his karma and what he went there for and what he was meant to do. The Indians had been occupying America for so long, for thousands and thousands of years, and doing it quite well, fighting amongst themselves from time to time, but that's all. Then came colonization, as you might say, and a white man arrived, and there was a need to spread into Indian lands. And that's the first thing we have to remember. The Indian never sought to hurt white man. The white man sought to hurt the Indian. And there were at times some trappers and others who came into Indian lands. And they were allowed in there if they were respected and they treated the environment properly, and they took out of the environment no more than what was meant. Went wrong when greed started to take over. So far we've got a backdrop that says the Indians have been there forever, and white man's just arrived. White man sees himself as dominant, and this all took place in the time of Crazy Horse's incarnation into his life in that time as an American Indian. Now we need to understand the Indian, because if we view Crazy Horse now as he is now in spirit, no longer an American Indian, well above the emotions of earth, but there are a lot of things that he's very sad about. And because he's sad about it, the feelings of that touch me and come through me, and I'm probably more perturbed today than he is. We'll start with understanding some of the cultures of the Indian. What it was built on was ancestors and the Great Spirit. And their ancestors and the knowledge of their ancestors only came through word of mouth. So stories were passed on. Now, obviously, when stories are passed on, there's a question about accuracy. But nonetheless, that's the only way they understood what had come before them. And what had come before them was stories of bravery, stories of being with the land, and so much was taught. And we'll go into that in just a moment. That was their knowledge of history, was what's passed down. With Crazy Horse, what is the most interesting thing in terms of history is that those stories were passed down by people telling what they did. Crazy Horse refused. He never talked about himself. He never talked about what he did. Therefore, the stories of Crazy Horse that are passed down are not from him. We hope they're from people who were with him on these different adventures and battles and so forth. The degree of accuracy we don't know, because he hasn't said it. Only they've said it. Now, therein lies, a lot of questions, and gives a greater import into what we hear from Crazy Horse directly now, because this is his version, and this is his context of what went on amongst the Indians then with the white man, and how that relates to today. They had a great respect for their ancestors, and they had a great respect for the ancestors of their tribe. So it was quite tribal. He, of course, broke that by moving beyond his own tribe into the wider Sioux tribe and beyond. And eventually he united them and brought them together. But they were tribal. The next thing that they were all taught is their understanding of and their love of the Great Spirit. And in our words, that's a spiritual belief, and the Great Spirit is what we would call today a guide, as Crazy Horse is to me. They were taught of the presence of the guide. They were taught of their ability to communicate with the guide. And in the life of Crazy Horse, it's germane, it's relevant to understand that that's what stood him apart. He was a great clairvoyant, and he was known because at a very young age he went and did his first meditation. They had a different name for it, but we'll use our terminology. His first meditation gained information about his life and about what was facing the Indians into the future. So at a young age of approximately 7, he was then faced with the responsibility for doing something about the future of the Indian nation as a consequence of his communication, of his meditation with the Great Spirit, who they call the Wakantanka. He was very reverential and very understanding to his Great Spirit. It was made easier because his father was the tribe's medicine man, whose name was Crazy Horse as well, who passed on that name. Crazy Horse, of course, wasn't born Crazy Horse, that was passed on. His father gave it to him when he was still alive because he recognised the significance of Crazy Horse's role. So thus far what we have is a culture that says these are the things that have happened before us. We have to honour that and better that. We're not here to sit around and do nothing. We're here to learn from our ancestors and to make our tribe better and stronger so we leave something more for those who are behind us. And that was the whole history of the Indian nation, of that improvement. What they could never understand and were highly offended at, once they understood what it meant, was the temerity of white man to call them savage. They couldn't understand it. They couldn't understand what was savage about only taking from the land what you needed, about no need or use for gold, about no need to wantonly kill animals. They couldn't understand that, and they thought that was savage. So we have this massive disparity of views from an early time of white man's arrival. These are all the things that are going around now in Crazy Horse's mind from, again, that very young age. Let's look again some more at the life of the Indian. By the time that he was 2, he was as good a rider of a horse as he was when he was 22, because the Indians were taught, and they were taught by different ones, but so much of it was from the grandfathers, how to ride. Why they were so successful at learning to ride at that age is because, unlike the white man, they weren't taught to control a horse. They weren't taught that I'm superior to an animal. They were taught equality. They were taught to learn to feel and understand the horse and to communicate with it in different ways so that it will go and do not only what they want, but at times what it wants. And they learned the rhythm, the feel, and everything else of the horse. That allowed them to do what appeared to be tricks on horses. But to them, they weren't tricks. It allowed them to come off the horse, on the horse at full speed, lie in different positions, protect themselves from arrows and bullets and so forth. But that was easy because they did it in harmony with the movement of the horse. Again, the context of this is how differently they were. They weren't about sitting in a saddle, using a bridle. They weren't about controlling the horse so it would only do what they wanted. They believed in the freedom and the expression of the animal. They could ride much better than they could walk. They were taught about nature, and they were taught about the significance of nature. And that was predominantly by the grandfathers. And they were taken into the hills, and they were taken into the streams, and they were made to stand. They were made to listen. They were made to watch still for hours, just taking in nature and what was happening, what they could hear, what were the different calls the animals were making, what distressed them, what didn't. Why at the start of a day did a bird cry or call out? And it wasn't a bad call, it was a good call. Why would they do that? Because they're honouring the day. Just like you, young brave, should be honouring the day. Totally different from the way white man's taught, because there's no expectation. The expectation put upon them was to be as one with nature, to fit with it and to be a part of, so they're in harmony. And they couldn't do that without the knowledge, the wisdom and the patience of the grandparent. So their role was very important. Within that, they also learned of equality in a tribe in every respect, because they learned of the role of the women, and the women in the tribe were called Winyan or Winyans. Now, what they learned was they might not be the ones going out fighting, but they had to have the same understanding of nature. They had to have the same understanding of the tribe. The women provided what the men, the wika, what they needed in order to feed the tribe. in order to hunt the buffalo and hunt the fish and catch the fish and so forth. And that was given great respect, as was the weapons that the women made, all made from the buffalo or from stones. Of the beautiful dresses, of the colours that they put into stones or found in stones. All of the beauty came from the women, and that was treated as equal. Nothing was seen as anything but equal. So the American Indian never had a problem with equality. It was born and bred into them and instilled into them. They never ever saw themselves as better than a female. They saw themselves as equal to, with a different role. They did see themselves as protectors, and this was critically important. And it was, in some ways, that if there was a dominance, it was because it was their duty to stand up and fight and protect the women, were it to come to that. So they were proud, they were fighters, but they were absolute lovers of nature. They loved each other, they loved their tribe. It had been going forever. And for the first time in their whole history of thousands and thousands of years, their future was called into question. They didn't understand it. It was a battle, and this was an incredible battle for Crazy Horse. Why is this happening? And this is his great pain. We have a culture that's so far advanced, and more advanced than what's happened today, because I'll skip across and let's look to the crux of this. You destroyed our culture, and for what? Nothing's better today. It's worse. If you destroyed our culture for some gain other than financial and power, I might be able to understand it. I cannot, because I see nothing in society that tells me all of these years later that it was worthwhile. Let us move forward now to respect, and respect of the animal, and the buffalo in particular. They were taught so much through observation of the buffalo. They were taught again by those who had hunted the buffalo. They were taught that you don't wantonly kill. You only go out, find the buffalo, and kill what's required. But they didn't do what the white man did and tried to shoot them from a hide from far away and catch an unsuspecting animal, because that was unworthy of the spirit of the animal. That's taking something for no give. What Crazy Horse and all other Indians, including the Lakota Sioux, were taught to do was to, as the buffalo stampeded when they felt the threat, they rode in amongst them, not on the periphery, not on the edge. They rode in amongst them until they found the buffalo that they felt was right and ready to sacrifice, to be sacrificed for the good of their people, so that they can have their toys, they can have their food, they can have their bowls, they can have their cutlery. Everything came from within that buffalo. And then they rode up right beside it and loosed their arrow from a metre or so. This is amongst a stampeding herd. And then they had to extricate themselves safely, and that didn't always happen. So the bravery and the honour that they bestowed upon the buffalo before taking their life was something that the white man does not understand and did not understand. You see, the context of that is that the buffalo was the lifeblood of the Indian, and they revered it and they thanked it, and they did their own ceremony to thank its spirit for giving its life for the continuation of the Sioux people. And it was with great honour that they returned from a hunt carrying their catch. And they had to start doing this when they were young. Therefore, we can say that they were taught in, the men, the Wicca, were taught in the warriors, because this was part of becoming a warrior, an akachita. They were taught in two main streams. One was to hunt the buffalo for the tribe, and one was to fight to protect the tribe. Historically, as we say, that had been against other tribes of Indians. Before we move on any further, I'd like to go back a little step and think about the life of Crazy Horse. His father was regarded as wise and knew a lot because he was a medicine man, and that was a revered position. What Crazy Horse learned from that were a few things. The benefit of the Great Spirit, of the Wakantanka, and the power of that and the knowledge coming through his father and through him. He also learned that other positions had a degree of what's called politics. There was some, not just a birthright, there are election processes for different office holders within a tribe. And he found that abhorrent. He could not understand politics in any form. He didn't see it in the animals. All he saw was animals being themselves. He saw it in the behaviour even amongst the Indians. And his great teaching then and his great teaching to us now. Remove yourself from politics. Politics adds so little to the world. And it's not necessarily or usually for the benefit of anyone other than the politicians. And that's what he lived by and that's what he taught. Everything he achieved was because of him, not because of a title. People came to Crazy Horse and they knocked on his door for help because of his wiseness and because of his ability to receive information from the Great Spirit. He also learned that he needed to talk to people. So he had a group of peers that he talked to, not necessarily his own age. Most of you, or one in particular friend, was older than him and already an Akachita, a brave, a warrior. And he spent a lot of time with him, riding with him, talking to him, learning. And that's how they saw friendship. Friendship wasn't just about talking about little things. To him and to the Indian more broadly, it was discussing the experiences of that brave and what they'd learned from that. In that, he was trying to understand the life of the Indian, the history, and solve mysteries going forward. What that takes us to is that the Indians were adventurous and all of these experiences were of boldness. That's because they're teaching from not so young, but from approximately the age of 8 on, was to go out, go and explore. What their parents or the grandparents would say, out you go on your horse with some provisions, but certainly with your bow and arrow and your knife. If you go past these points, you're out of Sioux land. You're out of the Lakota land. So there's a higher risk of coming across another tribe. You can go there, but be more vigilant. Within the outer reaches of our land, there's still a risk of them coming into our land. So you have to be careful. That's all we can tell you. You must now go for as long as it takes you to go and experience and do whatever you find out there. We just want you to come back safely, but having learned. If you come back not having learned, the trip was wasted. And the only way you can learn is to be bold and adventurous. So this was inherent. It was built in to the nature and the culture of all Indians. So opposite to the white man. So later on, when it came to trying to discuss treaties and so forth, the cultures were so far apart that there was actually no hope. But let's go back. They were also taught to be warriors. And there were lots of things that warriors were meant to do, which Crazy Horse refused. He refused to go through a lot of the tests. He never wanted his body marked. He said, that's not what it's about. That's not fair, and that's not, you can do it. You can have all of these rituals, that's fine. I don't need to prove myself in that way. I will prove myself in what I do on the battlefield. With the white man, they're taught to fight. With the Indian, it was different. Culturally, we're a part of our past. This is what our ancestors did. And this is what I'm told, said Crazy Horse, by my Wakantanka, my Great Spirit, about what I need to do. Therefore, part of that's going to involve fighting. But I'm not fighting as Crazy Horse. I'm fighting as an ambassador of my Great Spirit and as an ambassador of my ancestors. I'm a part of them, they're a part of me, and we're all in this together. So he never went out in a fight believing that it was just him, but as a representative of the culture and of the future. He didn't believe in desecrating any enemy, and that included the white man. It was the normal practice of the Indian to take scalp. So when they killed someone or almost killed someone, was to remove their hair and the top layer of skin, and they kept that and they carried it proudly. And a lot of their success as a warrior, as an Akachita, was by how many scalp they carried. He said, no, that's a disrespect to my enemy, to the white man, to another warrior. They might not be at the same standard of warrior, but it's still a disrespect. And I'm not going to do that. He refused. in the same way that he refused so many rituals. Again, he saw the body as something that you didn't interfere with. He wanted to give the spirit of that white man every chance to be free to do whatever it is it had to do, and he wouldn't do anything in any different way. If we looked at the Indian at that time, the only way that you would count wealth was in the form of horses. And they were horses won or stolen or in some way obtained by the braves. And if they fought someone and they killed someone, they would take their horse. And it would be nothing for them to have a troop or an armada or whatever one might call it of horses, 30 to 40 horses or more. And that was seen as very powerful. Crazy Horse said, not for me. I need no more than 4, because that will give me what I need for my battles, to keep them fresh and to be fully trained. I don't need any more than that. I will not have them. Not to say that he let them run. He captured them and he gave them away. And he gave them within his tribe to the women who had lost sons. They could then do with them what they wanted, including trading or other things. But it gave them something, and it gave them the use of a horse for their other children that they might not otherwise get. So this was his big thing, because it was so ingrained about female equality. My role is to do these things. I can't do it without them. If I can have too many, I will give to them. So this talks about his sense of community, his sense of all in it together. If we're going to take something, there's got to be a communal benefit. And if there's not, please don't take it. Opposite to the white man. Again, we're back to that clash of culture. I'm going to come back now to battle. And this is a really important thing for Crazy Horse. He attracted people to fight with him where he believed a cause was worthwhile. And that's because he was able to receive information from his Great Spirit about what would happen in the battle and how to fight the battle. That proved itself time and again to be accurate. Therefore, people had a belief that in fighting with him, they'll be probably safer, better chance of returning, but even if they're not, it's for a proper cause. And he taught them, we only go into this battle for this reason, because this is the outcome for the benefit of the tribe. We're not gaining any material possession. We're only doing this to protect our history and to make us stronger as a tribe going forward. So he was the epitome of someone with a bigger purpose who pulled people together. So there was such a selflessness, opposite to the selfishness of the white man. They could never ever understand him, and he can never understand what went wrong. So we go into battle, and what Crazy Horse prepared them all for every time was to be as one with their Great Spirit. And they did that usually for at least 12 hours before the battle, oftentimes overnight, sometimes during the day. And it was a time of dance, it was a time of meditation, it was a time of communal, of being together. And all of those exercises, for the lack of a better word, were only to make them as one with their Great Spirit going into the battle. So they never felt alone. He would take them back to commune, to understand history, to remind it, to understand the purpose of what they were doing, to know that the outcome was less important than doing their best. So they were committed. By the time they were fighting, they were 100% committed to the purpose and what they were doing and why they had to do it. By the time the call came for battle, they were at peace. They were totally focused, and they saw him as their first amongst equals, the one who would take them and show them the way. He was regarded as a fearless warrior, and it helped to his reputation because it seemed that a bullet in battle couldn't touch him. And that's what he was told as a child, that he would never be touched by a bullet in battle. And he never was touched by a bullet in battle until, of course, his death. And that was not in battle. So what would happen when they would leave to go into battle is that there was a cry from Crazy Horse, and his first words were, "Let's ride, hokkahe, let's ride." And the next thing was, "Today's a good day to die." And he would, of course, say that, "Nokke nula won, today is a good day to die. Let's ride, today is a good day to die." There wasn't a cheering cry from that. It was just a resoluteness. And we would ride, or they would ride more precisely off into battle. When they got to the battle scene, he always had his lance carrier, and he would put the point, put the lance in the ground there. The Indian knew, the warriors knew, that they could not retreat back past there. The battle's that way. That's our point of no return. Nothing is going to cause us to go back beyond that unless that's pulled out of the ground. That's our signal that we change direction. So therefore they committed themselves, their spirit, their body, everything, totally without fear. There was no fear because they were so committed and so much as one with their Great Spirit to what they were fighting and what they had to do. This made them fearsome. It made them very hard to beat. The only thing that beat them was weight of numbers and greater artillery by the Americans. And isn't that still the way by the white man's what I'm trying to say? Nothing has come close to that culture of the Indian in all of those fights, in fighting for their survival. A fight that Crazy Horse knew they couldn't eventually win. But what we had to do was try and convince them in the meantime that there is no reason for you to take gold from our hills. There is no reason to kill us off. There is no reason to push us out of our land. Why can't we find a way to leave us our land and you have the rest? But that wasn't enough. What particularly incensed him was how the white man decided to kill the culture, thousands and thousands and thousands of years of Indian culture, being with one with the ancestors, with the Great Spirit, everything they fought for. And they did that by getting in hides and killing millions and millions of buffalo until there were none left. The Indians had no way to live, no way to feed themselves, no way to do anything. And the white man then created reservations and put cows on them and said, if you're a very good little boy, we'll give you a cow so you can continue to live. And if you're not, you starve to death. And then they introduced alcohol and then religion. Effectively, they killed the culture so that they could win the land, so that they could have the gold and they could have more agriculture, trains and so forth, increase their wealth. He couldn't understand it. And that's where we started this. Why? What have you left? What have you achieved since then? Or are you still doing the same? Are you still trying to take over, to control, to dominate, to kill off cultures for no net gain other than for the gain of some politicians, the loss of the soldiers fighting, loss of their lives and so forth, and the hurt to their families, with nothing of any distinct improvement in society? That's why he's such a fearless and beautiful leader of our council, because he's saying the world needs help. There's got to be a different way. I couldn't do it when I was on earth. I couldn't think or find a way other than leave my mark, that we will not be downtrodden, we will not be overcome without a fight. And the fights will be such that you'll remember us. It devastates him that the culture of the Indian hasn't returned, that it's been so submerged and suppressed that their spirit hasn't yet been refound. And why he doesn't understand why the government of America is so concerned about that. They're a force that's been changed, been wrecked through all sorts of things. Allow them to be Indians, he says. Find your culture, find your connection to your history way back when. Because that's who you are, that's what's in you, that's your genetics. And that's not to hurt the rest of America or the world, that's to add to it. And that's what he's about. See, Crazy Horse didn't believe in being just in his wee tribe. He moved himself amongst what we would call the cousins, the tribes, the others. And he lived at different times of the year in a number of tribes. He says he lived amongst 5 or 6 at different times. And that was to bring them together. That was to integrate the beauties of the different tribes into one, and they all gained from each other's knowledge and strength. And they became better as a consequence. He didn't understand, and he still doesn't understand, division and the reduction of power and authority. It means nothing to him because it adds nothing to the future of the world. Crazy Horse was taught about the continuation of their race. He was taught about the continuation of all forms of society. He wasn't ever taught or tried to practice the eradication of one group for the benefit of another. The only reason he could do all of that because of their understanding of the knowledge of the Great Spirit. That's why he says, no matter what you think in life, your spirituality is number one, your private life is number two, your work life is number three, the least important by far. If you don't get the first one right, you won't get the second one right. If you don't get the second one right, you won't get the third one right. It's a cycle that are mutually dependent upon each other. In no way is Crazy Horse making a negative comment about religion. What he's saying is that has a place. But there's something above religion, and that's what we call spirituality. And that's concerned with values that affect all people and that are for the betterment of all, not taking a secular view. He didn't believe that we should have different values because we were a white man to the Indian, or one tribe of Indian to the other. He's saying it's time for a unity, it's time for a coming together, and it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened in destruction. It hasn't happened in doing things for greed, lust, and personal power. What the world's missing are people who are concerned about the world. And only when we're concerned about the world can we then be concerned about what's beyond the world and understand there's something bigger than all of that. But let's start where we can. Let's start to look at the values that can draw us together, that are selfless, where we start to think, how can we do things for the betterment of the world rather than the betterment of just self? Think bigger. There's a cost to that. And that cost can be a lot of leisure time. It can be a lot of things. But if that's your calling, that's what you must lead. And if it's not your calling, then follow it. Thank you.